Good afternoon. I am Francis Johnson. I'm an attorney practicing law here in Statesboro, Georgia, and it's indeed my pleasure to represent, along with the dynamic team that we've assembled, Mark Wilson. Mark Wilson, has been accused of felony murder and aggravated assault in connection with the incident that led to the death of Haley Hutchinson, a 17-year-old, back on June the 14th here in Statesboro, Georgia. Since that time, Marcus has cooperated with law enforcement. He's done everything that has been asked of him, and the system is already beginning to fail him. What we are doing today is pushing back against that failure and literally trying to stop illegal lynching from taking place. That Marcus should have the full application of the law, the benefit of the doubt. He should be believed. The witnesses should be believed, and this racially charged prosecution should stop. I'm grateful that joining me in this press conference are a number of people who have come to aid Marcus. He affectionately goes by Mark Wilson in this endeavor. And they are members of the legal team that we've assembled. The team consists of Maoli Davis of the Davis Bozeman law firm of Decatur, Georgia, Martha Hall of Hall and Navarro of Springfield and Statesboro, Georgia, R. Gary Spencer of Atlanta, Georgia, and Pateria Clark of Clark and Clark Law Group of Atlanta, Georgia. Also speaking today will be Chief Pat Wilson and his wife, Amanda Wilson. They're the parents of Mark Wilson. Additionally, we'll have a representative from Just Georgia, which is a statewide coalition created by leading civil and social justice organizations in response to the horrific killing of Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia. Tamika Middleton will represent the Just Georgia coalition. And then the Reverend James Major Woodall, state president of the Georgia NAACP, will have some remarks. On tomorrow, here in Statesboro, Georgia, Bullitt County Annex, before Judge Michael Muldrew, there will be a bond hearing to determine whether Mr. Wilson can be released on bond, and we think that he has every right to be released on a bond. We'll talk about that a little bit later, as well as a preliminary hearing where we'll be able to hear some of the first impressions of the case. The state has the absolute burden of proving beyond any reasonable doubt. Make no mistake about it, we believe that if Mark Wilson was a white gentleman that night accosted by a truckload of angry, belligerent, possibly drunk black men, and he used a legally possessed firearm to defend himself and his passenger, that he would have been given a medal and not given a prosecution. And so that's what we're dealing with in this case, and that's why this defense team has been formed and we're coming together. Attorney Maoli Davis will share a little bit on the dynamics of a case like this. Maoli, are you prepared to speak at this time?
Yes, I am.
Go ahead,
I'm
brother.
Attorney Maoli Davis with the Davis Bozeman Law Firm, and we have had the unfortunate experience of having to represent a gentleman that was similarly situated as Mr. Wilson is today. We have had to represent a client who we believe should have been provided the immunity from prosecution as a result of him defending his life, and his name was Jesse Murray. This case took place back in 2016, and so what our experience has been is that the immunity that is typically extended to people who are defending their lives or the lives of others or even their property is not oftentimes extended to Black people and people of color, particularly when the alleged victim is white. And so we have decided as a law firm that we will join this team of attorneys, both from Statesboro and from Atlanta metro area, to provide the very best possible defense that we can to really challenge the system of justice here in Georgia. Not only do we recognize that Marcus Wilson's life is on the line, we also recognize that the system of justice that we claim to uphold in Georgia is also going to be tested. And so we're prepared to do everything in our power to fight on this young man's behalf to ensure that what was passed by the legislators will apply to him and will help protect his Black life as well. And so that is the challenge that we face. That is the challenge that we're prepared to take on. I am thankful to the, again, to the lawyers who are willing to participate. Attorney Gary Spencer has been a role model to many lawyers in the Atlanta metro area and throughout the state, a past president of the Gate City Bar Association. Attorney Nafatari Clark is an incredible rising lawyer who has taken on with great passion and confidence very difficult cases. And so obviously I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to work with Francis Johnson and Martha Hall. So again, thank you all for being here this morning. We look forward to being in Statesboro tomorrow as a part of the legal team as we continue the legal work that Attorney Francis and his team has already begun. Again, thank you. I'm Attorney Mawali Davis with the Davis Bozeman Law Firm, and we look forward to ensuring that justice is in fact served for Black folk in Georgia, and it is not reserved just to the white community.
I want to again reiterate the composition of our legal team, which will consist of Mawali Davis, who you just heard from, of Davis Bozeman. Will also include Martha Hall of Hall and Navarro. Attorney Hall is a seasoned and veteran trial attorney in Southeast Georgia and is very familiar with the justice system in this area. And we have worked together closely and look forward to advancing the cause of bringing Mark Wilson home to his family. Additionally, Nefertaria Clark of Clark & Clark is a rising star in our profession. She has taken on some very serious but difficult and complex cases, including defending Olivia Pearson, who was charged by the then Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, with voter fraud. Of course, she was able to successfully defend Olivia Pearson in that matter down in Coffee County. And so she's just from a legacy of civil rights lawyers and her father, John Clark. We dare not fail to mention his name, a stalwart in the community who has been a mentor to a lot of us on the call. Additionally, Gary Spencer is I'm saying seasoned and veteran, but he is a senior member of this team, has extensive criminal defense history, and will anchor us. His focus is primarily on complex criminal matters, and we're grateful to have him joining. And then rounding out the team, we'll anchor the team here in Statesboro, and we look forward to advancing this our singular cause, which is to make sure that we bring Mark Wilson home, and that the law is applied equal to everyone, including those who happen to live in Southeast Georgia. quality of justice shouldn't be determined by your zip code. Members of the legal team are on the call, and if you have questions, they can certainly answer them in the Q&A. I want to ask Tamika Middleton from Just Georgia Coalition if she would share a little bit about Just Georgia Coalition and their focus on this particular case.
Absolutely. Thank you, Francis. My name is Tamika Middleton, and I am very grateful. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. Again, my name is Tamika Middleton, and I'm grateful to be here on behalf of Just Georgia. Just Georgia is a coalition of organizations, lawyers, and activists from throughout the state who came together in the aftermath of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery to support the Brunswick community and also to work to shift the landscape of our state. The coalition is anchored by organizations such as the Georgia NAACP, the Southern Center for Human Rights, the New Georgia Project, and the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. The Arbery case made transparent a number of issues facing Georgians that we believe are also highlighted in the case facing Mark Wilson. First, we have deep concerns about the decision-making of prosecutors and prosecutorial accountability. In the aftermath of Ahmaud Arbery's death, prosecutors repeatedly failed to act and took action. And when they did act, they took actions that stood in direct opposition to their obligations and to the ethics of their office. We are concerned in this case that police officers have misled the public, allowing the details of this case to be misrepresented and thereby prejudicing both officials and the community against Mark Wilson. Second, laws guiding the criminal legal processes in this state have served to unjustly criminalize Black and brown people, leading to mass incarceration and also to the death of Black folks like Ahmaud Arbery. We recognize that laws like Stand Your Ground that protect white people who use lethal force to defend themselves are not applied with the same efficacy when Black people are defending and protecting themselves. Just Georgia is working to change legislation in the state such that Black Georgians are not criminalized for surviving in the face of racial terror. Finally, Just Georgia has recognized the necessity of building up our capacity across the state to respond in the face of tragedy. We are working to train a cohort of activists and community organizers and to build up our social justice capacity. We recognize that in Georgia, and especially outside of the metro Atlanta area, Black people are facing a state of emergency. We are working with community organizations to build up their capacity and also our statewide infrastructure so that we can respond in the face of anti-Black violence and the criminalization of Black and brown communities. Thank you. You're muted, Francis.
If you could, before you go on mute, Ms. Middleton, list some of the members of the coalition.
Yes, again, the coalition members are the Georgia NAACP, the Southern Center for Human Rights, New Georgia Project, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. Sorry, I am losing my, oh yes, the Working Families Party, and Black Voters Matter, as well as the Black Male Voter Project.
Thank you so much, Ms. Middleton. I want to turn to two people that I've come to know as well as their extended family, and that is the Wilson family. They have done what America has asked of them. They have worked hard, they've raised their children well, and they've taught them to respect the institutions that govern our society, including the criminal justice system. Chief Pat Wilson has dedicated his life to protecting communities. He has worked here in Statesboro, in fire service, and in Coweta County, where he lives now. And there he serves as Chief of Fire Services. Amanda Wilson has served the community as an educator for a long time. They're the parents of Mark Wilson, and I want you to hear from them at this time. Chief Pat and Amanda.
Hello, my name is Pat Wilson, and I am Mark's father. First of all, giving honor to God and to our Savior Jesus Christ. We're just so thankful to have the team that we have with the attorneys, to Mr. Johnson and all of the legal team that's been put together, and all the support staff of this office for Mr. Francis Johnson. We're so thankful as a family to you all, and also to our family and many, many, many friends that have supported this family, supported our son, Mark, who is, I call him my little buddy, because from the day he was born, each one of my kids all have a little nickname from their dad. And Mark has always been my little buddy, although he is taller now and much more good looking than his dad. He is an amazing young man. Mark is a strong Christian. His character is based on loving others. That is who Mark Wilson is, and has always been, and will continue to always be. Mark lives by this one scripture that he loves. He's passionate about this in Psalms 27:3. And my wife, Amanda, will read that here in just a few minutes when she speaks. He was brought up to love all. And he has a very blended family. We're very blessed to have this very, very blended family that we have. Not only the Wilsons, but the Pridgeons, and not only the Pridgeons, but the Wrights, and so many others, the McClendons, the McCrays, so many others that are tied to this family, and so many friends. I tell you, Mark is a kid that has a great heart, a large heart. And not only does he have a great heart, but he cares about everyone. So many people, everybody that meets Mark falls in love with Mark. And it's very apparent. I laugh at him often at his job where he works at a local gym in Noonan, Georgia. And when you walk in the gym, people are constantly around him because he is a source of energy. Mark, like our other children, were all brought up to be law-abiding citizens. We taught them to trust in law enforcement and other legal establishments. However, today, I believe that trust has been broken, bottom line. Mark has been painted to be something that he is not. From the onset, where he has cooperated with authorities, it's like his story was not even heard. And in fact, he immediately was charged with this heinous crime, but yet he was trying to protect not only his life, because the first one he talked about was the life of the passenger in the car with him, his girlfriend. That's what Mark is about. Mark is about that person that was totally defending. And to know that he has been labeled, he has been pictured as someone that's part of terror is just so disheartening. When I know this young man has been about love, about peace, and he did all he could to make a difference to save not only his life, but he was more concerned about the passenger in his car, trying just to get that threat off of them. And to see where we're at today is disheartening. We believe that the facts will come out as we move through this case. We know that Mark is loved. This is evident in so many letters, phone calls, text messages that we have received as a family. I know the attorney has received. We're thankful for that because we know that we did everything to make sure that he had all the right tools, all the right resources to grow up to be a strong citizen in this great state of Georgia. There are laws that are on the book. And what we ask is that he be considered equally through this process. We don't believe that's happened so far. We know that our team will work hard to show this over the next coming time. Just to tell you a little bit more about Mark, this kid is passionate about sports like many other young adults, especially football. He's very passionate about that. He's also passionate about taking care of himself and being into strength training and teaching others about strength training and nutrition and all these things. Mark is just that guy. He is that guy. You know, I tell people that he is, like I said earlier, he is an amazing young man. He's loved by many. His heart is large. We're thankful because we know the Lord is working through this. He has put us with the right team. We have a loving family and so much support. We know that God will see us through this, and God will see Mark through this. And we're so thankful. He came right. Give me a heart, baby.
As a mother, I know that it must be very hard what the Hutchinson family has had to go through, but I know that had the roles been reversed and Mark not reacted the way he did, we would be mourning the loss of 2 lives instead of 1. And it would be his and his girlfriend's, and we would have never known what really happened that night. Mark is a loving and caring person, and he has been painted and made to look like somebody that he's not. And I hope that everybody will just take the time to get to know him through the stories that have been told by those that know him and love him. And they will get to know the real Mark too, and not just jump to conclusions because of his actions, because he felt scared and he reacted the way he felt like he had to save his life and the person that was in the car with him. His song that he goes by, that his dad mentioned, is Psalm 27:3. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war arise against me, yet I will be confident. And I do feel like if we just keep Mark strong and keep his confidence, we're going to get through this. And we have a lot of faith in our team that's working for us. And we have faith in God, and he'll take care of everything.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. I know that this is difficult for the Wilson family, the extended Wilson family that I've got a chance to meet and to know, and we're in this together. I want to turn to James Major Woodall, who is the president of the Georgia NAACP, for some reflections on why this case matters, why this story about what's unfolding here in Southeast Georgia, whether it's the Ahmaud Arbery case, is a Georgia story, is an American story, and why it warrants your attention today.
Thank you, Attorney Johnson, and to the Wilson family, and to our colleagues, our legal colleagues, our Georgia colleagues, and media as well. Where we find ourselves today is very troubling. Here in the state of Georgia, we've continued to see the amount of lynchings that continue to promulgate in our communities. And what we're asking for is there to be a consideration of 3 very specific points today. First point that we want to raise is that there is a lack of diversity when it comes to the prosecutorial process here in the state of Georgia. In Bullitt County, in the Ogeechee Judicial Circuit, there is not a single African-American district attorney or assistant district attorney in that circuit. And why that's important is because the district attorney, in their ability to have diversity, would allow for there to be an informed prosecutorial discretionary kind of statement made, as opposed to what we saw here in the Wilson case. The second is a lack of investigative transparency. What we saw initially are reports from the Statesboro Police Department that were simply inaccurate and criminalized Mr. Wilson immediately. We continue to see the lack of really due process for African Americans and Black people here in this state and in this country. And instead of being given the due process that is afforded to each and every citizen here in this country, they were immediately criminalized and called murderer, when in fact he was the one who was literally defending him and his girlfriend's life. It also further contributes to the very racial animus that we continue to see in the level of violence that we see all over the state. If Black people's lives are not as important as value under the law, then we have a serious problem here in this country. The third and the final thing, as the NAACP, we are committed to stopping public lynchings. And what's happened to Mr. Wilson is shaping up to be a public lynching. And so we are going to do everything in our power to stand with this legal team, to stand with that family, and to stand with this community to ensure that justice truly is for all. And in closing, I'll suggest that, as my colleague Tamika shared, we are committed to looking at the racial disparity in use of force. Because if Black people cannot stand their ground as well, then nobody should be able to. But we know that Georgians deserve to be able to have equitable use of the law. And so with that, I'll yield back to Attorney Johnson.
Thank you, President Woodall, for those remarks. I appreciate that. And the unique position that you sit in as president of the Georgia NAACP, having been president before as well. There are several members of the media on the call, and some have registered themselves in the queue. If you have a question, if you just type your name and your outlet in the queue and in the chat, and we'll take them in order. The first is from Dale Kennedy from WTOC TV in Savannah, Georgia. Good afternoon, Dale.
Good afternoon, Dr. Johnson. I would have a question of Chief Wilson, if we bring him back up to the screen, and I think that's voice activated. But
sure.
My question would be, how did his son, when he contacted him to tell, how did he describe what had happened on the road, and what were his instructions, father to son, of how to move forward with this?
On behalf of the Wilsons, I'll answer that question. Mark Wilson and the occupant in the vehicle, his girlfriend, were in sheer terror that night. They expressed that immediately to law enforcement when they were interviewed. They've expressed that throughout. We think that the evidence will show that what Mark confronted that night is a Black man's worst nightmare, a truckload of possibly armed, belligerent, racist, tracking you down. And that's what he felt that night. The evidence will show that they attempted to run him off the road, and but for his actions, as his mother stated, we could be mourning the loss of two rather than the unnecessary death of Haley Hutchinson. And so that's what he felt, Dale. And it is what so many of us feel every time we watch these killings unfold on video before our very eyes. The difference in this case is Mark Wilson stood his ground. He shot back. He defended his life. And now we'll see whether the metes and bounds of justice in South Georgia afford him the same decency as it affords others. The basic notion of self-defense is one of the oldest affirmative defenses in jurisprudence. So we'll see whether that is afforded to Mark Wilson. I appreciate the question, Dale. Dale, did you have a follow-up or anything?
No, that would be it. I'll mute back up.
Thank you. Johnny Edwards from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thank you so much.
Hi, Mr. Johnson. I just want to see if you can elaborate on what you were just saying in response to the last question. You said this was basically racially motivated, that these were belligerent racists. Can you specify exactly what made this incident on the behalf of the other vehicle a racially motivated incident?
Sure. Racially motivated is, I guess, the catchword and buzzword that we use today. I'll paint the scenario and you can describe it as you will. 12:30 at night, Mr. Wilson and his girlfriend are returning from picking up a late night meal at Taco Bell when they are accosted by a truckload of guys hanging out of the window, waving their arms, possibly armed, and yelling phrases like nigger, your lives don't matter, and speaking directly to his girlfriend that she was a nigger lover. They continued to use their truck, which was much larger than Mr. Wilson's small Ford Focus, as a dangerous weapon and attempted to run him off the road. They struck the vehicle with some object, possibly even the truck, before Mr. Wilson took the actions that he took in defending his life and the life of his girlfriend. And so you can characterize it as racially charged, racially motivated, racist, whatever. It has no place in a modern society. This is something out of a horror movie. And I believe that that justice for Haley means that Mark Wilson is justified in his actions. And we think we're going to show that in court. And I appreciate the question, but that's the basis of this, Johnny Edwards. And that is all centered on the actions of the people in that truck that night.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's also been reports on social media that they might have been playing some sort of music from The Purge at the time. Does that borne out in your investigation?
We're investigating that angle as well. We have some reports that Mark Wilson wasn't the only person that was harassed that night. And so a part of this press conference is to let folks know that if you were terrorized that weekend by a truckload of guys similarly situated as we described, then you should call our office and talk to our investigators. If you call the police and they've not received your information or it's fallen on deaf ears, we want to know about it. We know of reports, Mr. Edwards, from the same town that these individuals come from, Claxton, where they played purge music outside of a Subway and harassed Subway clerk to the extent that they had to close the restaurant that night because she was so terrified. And so we're continuing to receive information, and it is painting a picture that none of us want to look at, but we must look at it. And in 2020, we have to collectively say that kind of action has no place in our society.
Do you know approximately how many shots Mark fired?
We're not able to comment on that at this point, but I appreciate the question.
I'll go ahead and mute and give someone else a chance.
Absolutely. Thank you. Like we got Ricardo Lewis from WSAV Savannah.
My questions were answered. Thank you.
Thank you. We got Melanie Eversley from BET.
I don't have a question at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being on. Thank you for reporting on this story.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Looks like we have Al Halkel from the Statesboro Herald.
That's right. I just wanted to ask the legal team, will you definitely be pursuing a stand your ground defense? And if so, does that lead to the idea that Haley was hit by accident while he was actually firing at someone else?
Well, tomorrow is a preliminary hearing, and that's what's in front of us. And that's a test of probable cause as to the accusations made by the officer. And it is possible that this could all end tomorrow. It is possible this could end at any time, that the prosecution wants to seriously sit down and listen to what Mr. Wilson went through that night and the statements of his girlfriend, who affirmed the same. Make no mistake about it, Mr. Wilson was defending himself, and we think the evidence will show that, Al. But in terms of the details of that, we're going to talk about that in the court of law. But the basis of what we're talking about is what has already been shared with law enforcement by the witnesses who were there firsthand. Al, do you have a follow-up question? You're the home team, so.
Well, not really a follow-up, but as far as the statements that were in your press release announcing this conference, that initially the Statesboro Police Department provided misleading media reports and allowed suggestions that the incident was random gang violence or even Black Lives Matter, Antifa inspired to foment. That's not something we've reported here. Where was that?
Sure. So let's take the misleading information first.
We did have our second story was that the police were saying that it was not random violence, along the lines of reassuring people that they could drive around the bypass and not be shot at.
Sure. Thank you, Al. I appreciate the question. So the misleading information, first and foremost, dealt with the notion that the Statesboro police allowed the Hutchison family to stand in the police barracks, hold up a picture of their daughter, and beg for information from the public as it relates to who might be responsible for this, when they already had interviewed Mark and his girlfriend, and Mark had already told them that he would respond to any warrants. And he did. I walked him into the police station. And while they were parading this family who suffered the loss of their child, asking for information that they already had, they sent his girlfriend to the car so they could use the room to have this farce of a press conference. And it was deceptive to the community because from earlier on in this incident, they knew Mark's involvement, and that was very clear. And secondly, they released certain information, and Al, you know this, after the statement that they released that Mark had surrendered himself with his attorney, they refused to release any other information at all. Information about the other occupants, they've neither confirmed nor denied some of the questions that were asked by other reporters on this call about the racial animus expressed by the occupants to Mr. Wilson or any other details. And in the wake of that, they've allowed the climate and atmosphere in this area to become highly racially polarized. And I will probably be accused of doing that through this press conference, but they allowed that to foment. Ms. Hutchison's mother, for example, posted on social media, "White lives matter. When are people in this community going to stand up for my white daughter?" She posted that. And there were other more incendiary posts to suggest that somehow Mark Wilson had some racial animus towards Haley Hutchison, that he might belong to Antifa or was a Black Lives Matter protester. When in fact, Mark Wilson is the product of a loving biracial family. He has a white mother. He had a white girlfriend. And this is absolutely ridiculous. So it is the Statesboro Police's job to make sure the community has good information, and their failure to correct that misinformation and to allow it to foment has produced the climate that we find ourselves in. Nadia Druitt from Law 360, how are you doing? Do you have a question? if you're speaking, if you could come off mute so we can hear you. She's asking the question, I'm wondering if you're planning to assert a stand your ground defense. I think that's the basis of her question. So the answer to that is if we will explore all options, and certainly self-defense and stand your ground are applicable in this case. As Attorney Davis stated earlier, there are just so few examples of when its applicability has been equally applied when the person using lethal force is Black and the person for whom lethal force is used against is non-Black. And so that's the test. Whether the metes and bounds of stand your ground will matter for Mark Wilson. Like they were purported to matter for the killers of Ahmaud Arbery. Remember, they were able to cloak themselves and stand your ground in self-defense claims and avoided arrest for more than 72 days, even though there was video evidence to contradict them. And that's all here in South Georgia. Hope Ford from WXIA 11 Alive in Atlanta.
Yes, hi, excuse me. I was just wondering if you could clarify if any of the men in the truck that night, if any of them were questioned by police or if they're known in the community in any way.
Sure, thank you very much. We know they were questioned by law enforcement. We don't know when. We know they were charged with offenses, but those offenses have not been linked to this particular case. We know that the truck that they were riding in has not been impounded. There were several steps along the investigatory path that hadn't been done properly, in our opinion. And so these individuals are known in the Claxton and Statesboro area. They have a reputation, and that will be explored as a part of the case as we go forward.
And if I could ask just one more question, was there
Sure.
any video evidence that was found to support your defense?
Sure. So just so you know the context of this, this was on Veterans Memorial Parkway, which is a sort of bypass that circles the town. And so there are parts of this bypass where portions of this incident first began that are in a commercial district. There are several cameras in the area, and we're reviewing all of that footage. But where the shooting took place is in an undeveloped stretch of this same highway, where it is pitch black and no structures around, and just what you might think of as sort of no man's land, if you will. And that's where the shooting took place. So we're reviewing all the video, and as we see things that are relevant to the case, obviously they'll be made a part of Mark's defense.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hope. Johnny Edwards of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Hey, thanks for taking another question. Would you be asserting that the way that the police should have handled this case, would it be that your client should not have been charged at all, or would it be that someone in the other car should have been charged with something as well? Can you speak to exactly how you're saying the police mismanaged this?
Well, what we're saying is that Mark Wilson and his girlfriend were not believed. Instead, they were treated like criminals. They were criminalized from the very moment this case began. And they've been maligned. The misleading statements from the community have not been pushed back to suggest that Mark Wilson and his girlfriend are members of Antifa, labeling Antifa as a terrorist organization. That's all on the Statesboro police. What Mark Wilson and his girlfriend did from the very moment, even though it wouldn't have been my advice, they cooperated. They told the harrowing story of what happened to them that night, what was thrust upon them, that they did not ask for. They took a ride to get a late night meal from Taco Bell and ended up turning their lives upside down. And that was not the fault of Mark Wilson or his girlfriend. That was the fault of the people in the truck who chased them down and then sought to run them off the road with a several-ton truck. And so,
what prompted them to speak to the police? Did the police contact them, or did they contact police on their own?
I think Attorney Davis can weigh in.
Yeah, but just as it relates to your question, I just want to be clear that there was a aggravated assault committed, but it was committed against Mark Wilson and his girlfriend. So the individuals in that truck should have been charged. And if their actions, the felony that they committed against Mark Wilson and his passenger resulted in the death of this 17-year-old, then they should be the ones who are not only charged with the aggravated assault against Mark Wilson and his girlfriend, but also the death of the passenger in their vehicle. And so we're very clear that this should not have been handled the way that it was, that they asserted a right to defend themselves, and they should have been immediately, Mark Wilson should have been granted immunity from prosecution because he was defending not only his life, but the life of his passenger. And so that is the position that we're taking. Not that he should be charged and someone else should be charged additionally. All charges against him there should be no charges against him because he did nothing other than what is our constitutional legal right to do, and that is to defend his life and the life of another. And that is an accepted practice and principle that we see, again, extended to white citizens throughout America, including to George Zimmerman in the killing of Trayvon Martin. And so if this is the law of the land, then it should apply to all citizens, and thus far it has not.
Would you be able to address that other question I asked about what prompted them to give their statements to the police? Did they contact police on their own, or did police contact Mark and his girlfriend?
I think Attorney Davis is on mute. That night, they had no situational, Mark or his girlfriend had no situational awareness that anyone had been struck by their firing of the weapon. It was only later on that they discovered that someone had died. We don't know whether that was the result of Mark shooting or possibly a firearm from within the truck. That's not been confirmed yet. But at some point, police contacted them, and they responded by answering questions from law enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Dennis Bryan from the Hip Hop Inquirer.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Counselor. The question was based on the way the case was reported and put out by the police. Would you consider requesting a change of venue based on just the coverage?
Well, thank you very much for the question. We appreciate the Hip Hop Inquirer and their interest in this story. You know, the team that we've composed is well versed in the need to change venue, and we'll explore and keep all our options on the table as we move forward. Tomorrow, there's a preliminary hearing. That preliminary hearing is a probable cause determination as it relates to the accusations the police have leveled against Mark Wilson, and that is that he committed an aggravated assault against Haley Hutchinson, and that assault resulted in her death, and so he's been charged with felony murder. Make no mistake about it, these are some of the most serious charges a person can be charged with under Georgia law. As as a matter of fact, I'll just say this by reference. None of the killers of the individuals for whom the nation is reckoning in terms of criminal justice, in terms of the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, the deaths of Breonna Taylor, or George Floyd, none of them have been charged, were charged initially with a crime as serious as Mark Wilson's charge. And so, as a matter of fact, in Breonna Taylor's case, nobody's been charged at all. And so that's what we're dealing with tomorrow, an application for bond for a young man who has no criminal history, who has significant ties to both South Georgia, Bullock County. This is where his parents met. This is where his father worked for many years before moving to Coweta. Strong ties in Coweta. He still has siblings who work here in the area and who are making their lives here in this area. And so he's 21 years old and he lives with his parents. And we think he should be sent home tomorrow so that he can properly prepare a defense and can move forward with this case. And so that's what we're asking for tomorrow. And we need the eyes of the world on this case because the kinds of injustices that go on in Southeast Georgia and around the country, it's not a particularly Georgia problem, happen when they're allowed to happen under the cloak of darkness, when they're allowed to happen when people are distracted. And so we are grateful for the more than 100 participants who were on this call today to put their eyes on this case. And we pray that you would keep your eyes on this case as we move forward. If you want information on Just Georgia Coalition, you can log on to the Just Georgia Coalition at just-georgia.org and receive information specifically as it relates to prosecutorial accountability, the legislative demands of that coalition, as well as the kinds of grassroots organizing that coalition is prepared to do in Southeast Georgia so that the communities can properly advocate for themselves. Georgia is a significant state in terms of the political environment at this point, and Georgia's got Georgia, as it is said. And so I'm grateful for the Just Georgia Coalition. More information on the NAACP can be found at naacpga.org, and you can find information on its mission and how it's carrying out that mission in small towns like Statesboro, as well as in the metro core like Atlanta and the like. And there's been no fiercer advocate for criminal justice reform than James Major Woodall, and we appreciate his support. Other supporters come from Loose the Chains, which is a project of the New Georgia Project and led by the Reverend Billy Honor. More information on the New Georgia Project can be found at www.newgeorgiaproject.org and Loose the Chains. This is a network of churches, faith community leaders, and others who are determined to see change in the criminal justice system as well, and grateful for that support, as well as the support of Bishop Reginald Jackson, the presiding prelate of the 6th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, church for whom Mr. Wilson is a member. And we're grateful for the support of faith leaders like Reverend Honor and Bishop Jackson. Thank you all for joining this press conference. If you have additional questions, feel free to send them to my attention. Again, Francis Johnson, info@Francis Johnson is the email. Again, the names and spellings of all the participants have been placed in the chat line. And if there's other questions that you have, again, follow up. Thank you all again for your time. Take care.